And welcome to the Ron Johnson Discipleship Podcast.
We are so blessed, so grateful you're tuning in today. We never want to take you for granted, and we really hope that these podcasts are helpful in fleshing out what's going on in the world around us, and then how to connect your faith, your Christian worldview to what's taking place, so that it brings, the end result is we want you to be a stronger believer in Christ. We want you to be clear in your own thinking so that you understand how your faith impacts the world and how you navigate through it. That's the beauty of a Christian worldview, is it helps us navigate and make sense out of the world around us. And to that end, here we are again. And we were kicked off last week. We're in if you missed the last podcast, Pastor Andrew and I are beginning to work through a really, really powerful book by a scholar named Carl Trueman. The full title is called The Rise and Triumph of Modern Self, Cultural Amnesia, Expressive Individualism, and the Road to Sexual Revolution. That's a
long time. He's an academic.
Yeah, he's an academic. But for the rest of us, there is an even shorter book that came out that you can check out. And I don't have the name of that one off the top of my head.
Strange New World.
There you go.
So play off the Brave New World.
Yes.
It's the Strange New World. Yeah.
But the Strange New World has a lot in common with the Brave New World. Yeah. We're going to get into that.
Much worse. Yeah.
But we were talking about, here we are in the midst of Pride Month again. A month that where we're celebrating things that we should not be proud about at all. We're celebrating things that our Christian worldview clearly condemns, certain forms of sexual expression that are evil in God's sight, and they do not lead to human prospering or happiness, but actually produce just the opposite. And this month can cause all kinds of, if you're trying to raise a family, as you are, as I am and have done. I'm a little bit farther along than you, but here you got young kids, and some of the mainstays of raising small kids, whether it's Oreo cookies or Disney or whatever, everybody now is got a rainbow somewhere and trying to.
I'll give you an example.
Okay.
On my calendar on my Android phone,
Yep.
June, first day in green, first day of LGBTQ plus Pride Month.
Yeah.
I can't get rid of it. It's on there. I tried to deselect whatever it is.
Yep.
It's on there. It's saying, hey, whether you like it or not, whether you celebrate it or not, doesn't matter what your religious belief, whatever that's true to yourself.
Right.
It's going to be
that you even wanted on your calendar.
It's on your phone.
Yeah.
So
somebody made that decision for you, and
Yep.
that's how you got greeted this month. And
Yep.
we were saying this kind of behavior causes those of us who have a Christian worldview and are trying to raise children to love the Lord and share biblical values. I mean, it's in your face everywhere we go, and for me, that causes a lot of frustration and anger and confusion, because what happens is you're asking the question, and I think most of you can relate to this: how do we get in this place? In fact, we started off last week's podcast by the question, or the statement, I am a woman trapped in a man's body, or a man trapped in a woman's body, that 30, 40 years ago, someone would have looked at that and said, dude, you got problems. And nowadays, that's like normalized. And the question we're trying to answer that this book discusses is, how did we get there? Mm-hmm. Because there's some major generational, pressures in raising kids. Like, let's just say your kids were going off to public schools every day, and maybe we're in a fairly conservative state, but let's just say we lived in a more liberal state. Your children are being fed a worldview that's diametrically opposed to everything you're trying to teach them as Christians. And they're going to be impacted by that. Mm-hmm. And you start to feel the pain because you're sitting around the table and you're having a discussion maybe about this Leah Thomas, the transgender swimmer that was on the news everywhere, and your kids are sitting there and you're having a discussion about that. And maybe your high school kids are giving you pushback and saying, well, just let her be who she feels like she really is. And you're saying, but she's not a she, she's a he, a confused he at that. And the whole point being, now we got tensions even around our dinner table. Mm-hmm. Or we see in some liberal states where by introducing all of this transgenderism to our younger kids, they're very confused and also encouraged to even explore that. And so now you've got kids coming home and having a different gender they want to, or a different pronoun or different gender that they want to be used, and parents are going, what in the world, is happening to my kids?
Yep.
So these are, and rightfully so, being terrified at what's happening to their kids. And if they try to just say, hey, we're not playing this game, then you've got liberal school systems coming down on them and actually taking kids away from parents. And this is a parent's worst nightmare. So I hope you find these series we're going to be doing helpful, because it gives us at least some mental constructs to understand how you get from point A to point B to point C. And we shared last week, we've gone from a concept of the self, which has become totally sexualized, which has now become totally politicized. And how did all that happen? So we want to talk today about the modern notion of self. What did self mean in the past? What does self mean now? And then we're going to look at a couple of things that make up our understanding of self. One of them is this phrase, expressive individualism. So we want to talk about that a little bit. The second thing that we have to get into is how expressive individualism logically leads into the sexual revolution and everything that's happened in the last 60, 70 years on that. And then following up on that, we get into this whole concept. We'll probably get into it more on the next podcast of this phrase, social imaginary, which is probably a new term. It's an academic term. It's probably new to all of us, but it's important to understand what that phrase means and how most of our people in our culture today are making decisions about all kinds of things. And that's that cultural phenomenon about how we discern right and wrong in the midst of society.
So you started by presenting a very practical problem that we're facing, and to which one of the solutions is, hey, stop using public school to parent your own kids.
Yeah,
so that's a very practical solution.
And many people, we're certainly not anti-public school. That's a decision that has to be made. But that's
any school, charter school, private school. Stop letting any school parent your kid. Parent your own kids.
Yeah,
God gave them to you. Okay, so that's one. But the second solution we're offering is really understand the philosophical foundation to this school of thought. And why is that important, Pastor?
Yeah. Well, because your philosophical understandings are the mental infrastructure that helps you navigate reality. Like we talk about this a lot. That we sit down, we have discussions, because the more we talk, I want to understand how things are from your perspective, right? And you want to understand from my perspective. We cannot interpret society unless we realize that there is a mental infrastructure there, whether people realize it or not. There are philosophical cornerstones, building blocks that lay the foundation of a worldview. Christianity has those foundational, theoretical, philosophical building blocks, and guess what? So does all this LGBTQ stuff, all the modern sexual revolution, the news media. All of them are operating from a worldview. And if we cannot decipher the building blocks of that worldview, that the way one thought leads to another thought, which leads to another thought, which leads to a conclusion, then we'll be scratching our heads going, how come people are embracing this? Like, where did that come from? And I think at the most practical level, we never get there. Right? Because we're just watching the news and,
most people aren't thinking philosophically. They just want to, work, feed the kids, pay your rent. And
you can't blame them. Who's got the luxury to do that?
Right.
But people in universities, people in the media, globalists,
Yeah, they fund money into these thinking institutions, and that's what they
create curriculums because they're pushing an agenda, and we need to understand that agenda. So let's talk about self. Think about years ago, or even from a Christian worldview, when we say self, what are we talking about?
Yeah, I mean, I don't think most people, I don't sit around and be like, what is this true self? What is myself? I just like me. I know I'm me. Okay. I'm not you. I'm me.
There you go. You're you. You're not me. And at the most basic level, I mean, that's what it is. Yeah. You are a unique individual. We would add, made in the image and likeness of God.
Sure. Yeah.
So you don't have to go try to find your purpose or meaning. You have intrinsic meaning and value because you're made in the image and likeness of God. And the fact that you're a self and I'm a self means that we're two individuals and we experience life differently and through our own personalities, our own giftings, and all those kinds of things. But the nature of self today that's not it. It's much deeper than that. And as he points out in his book, it's an answer to this question: where do we find the real me? Like, what is the basis for determining me, who I am, who I am as a self? Where's the authority come from? As I just shared with you, we would say, well, you're a created being, you're a finite being, you're a dependent being, you're a being made in the image and likeness of God, so you'll never discover yourself outside of that, excuse me, outside of that parameter. In other words, you come from somewhere, you're going somewhere, and to understand yourself, you need to understand the bigger picture. But everything's been turned upside down now.
Well, so I think we say stuff like we want you to become your best self. We want you to. So embedded in that notion is that there are false selves that comes in, sin and slavery mentality, victimization and stuff like that.
Sure.
In our context, we talk about how sometimes how we express ourselves is not the way how God has imagined it. But even when we say how God has imagined it, we're presuming that our best self is under the decree, under the ordinances of our Creator who created us, right? Even that notion, right?
So there's an understanding that a best self, it's like taking a test. There are right answers and wrong answers, right. and the best self is when you score 100
based on God's answers, based on God's decrees, based on the Creator,
right?
Okay.
And that's good because you and I can share the same world together. And while you're unique and different and separate from me, we still realize that like telling the truth is always right and good. And loving your neighbor the way Christ describes love, or behaving sexually the way the Bible describes that, that's what it means to be a good person.
And when you do something great, when you do something accomplished and that benefits many people, you say, well, the glory doesn't go to me. Don't make a statue of me. The glory goes to God because the gifts and the blessings comes from God. I mean,
so He's the standard.
He's the standard. These simple things we declare reflect how we view ourselves. We're subservient. We're servants of the Most High God. Right. That's embedded in what we say. I don't go around like, well, theologically. Someone said, "Hey, Andrew did a good job." I'm like, well, theologically is really. We don't break all that down, but embedded in all that belief is like we believe we are under the ordinances of God.
Well, and for years, whether people admit it or not, we were really, when we talk about being a part of a Christian culture, we're talking about being a part of a community that basically saw reality the same way and recognized that behaving that way was wrong, behaving this way was right, acting that way was not virtuous, acting this way was good. We encouraged that, we punished that. All of that's been turned completely on its head. And so when we talk about self now, how would you describe what's the main driving force for how a person determines who they are now?
Well, I think the easiest way to say it is you simply remove that ordinance, that authority of God. And you remove that, and everything goes haywire. Now there is no authority from an external source, right? From a transcendent source. You become your own authority. You create your own meaning. You decide what it is in there. And man, it's crazy out there when that happens.
When you bring up a good point. So really what's happening now isn't anything new. It's really, in some ways, the flowering of what happened all the way back in the Garden of Eden. Yeah. Because, here you had God who created Adam and Eve and went in fellowship with Adam and Eve and explained, he was the source of good and evil. They didn't need to eat from the tree of good and evil because God was the standard and would teach you what was right and what was wrong. But the lure and the lie of the enemy is you don't need God. You know what's right for you. Who is anybody to tell you what's right for you, right? You're the own source of authority. And here's the tricky part. What you feel is true and is right, irregardless of what anybody else thinks or says. In fact, any outside institution, whether it's the church, the state, education, anybody who wants to try to impose a standard on you is doing so from the position of bias and prejudice, and their authority should be rejected. Because you are your own authority. You're the captain of your own ship. And like I said, this isn't so much new, but what's crazy is how our feelings are now given absolute authority. And I don't know that we've ever seen it at this stage of blossoming in our culture to where it's almost insanity when you're looking at it.
Well, it's insane because you practically don't apply this to, excuse me, any other arenas of life. So, for example, I work for you. I don't feel like coming to work today. Because my true authentic self is that I want to be late today, or I just don't want to come to work.
Right.
Are you going to be like, well, I'm going to embrace your true authentic self? Well, I'm a student. I don't want to do this homework today.
Yeah.
There's my true authentic self feels that this way. Well, that's not acceptable. Obviously, it doesn't work on a functional basis, right?
Right.
I mean, my 4-year-old was like, I don't feel like listening to you today. I don't care about how you feel.
Right.
There's a greater authority.
Right.
Practically, that doesn't make any sense.
And
right?
a greater reality that we all share together.
Yep.
So if you just feel like you don't need to come into work today, and then the other 1,000 employees that a company has feel the same way, they're not in business very long, and you're all starving to death because there's no paychecks coming your way.
And the government basically said you can't fire them because that's how they feel. That's their true authentic self.
That would be the government enforcing the new authority, which is you or me or
But
my
they
feelings.
apply to other areas of life. Yeah, they don't apply in that area, but what about areas of sexuality?
Right, and that's a whole other arena. We'll get into that because this is, you bring up a great point. The modern self, he says, assumes that society at large, in other words, all the rest of us, will recognize and affirm these inner feelings of yours.
Yeah.
So self becomes what is defined as expressive individualism. So this is the big one. So you point out we're very selective now, but in the area of sexuality, which makes up the expressive individualism, in that area in particular, how you feel is the real you. And now, even if I disagree, like I feel that the real you is confused, you feel that the real you is finally coming out, right? The government says, no, you need to celebrate Andrew's feelings and embrace Andrew's feelings, and Andrew needs to be able to express himself publicly however he feels, because that's part of being authentic self. And this, we've never been in this place before where every radical individual whose feelings must be validated, we all have to try to navigate this new arena, which is impossible. It's possible to do. You can't have 6 billion people on the planet being authentically true to themselves and somehow live together in utopia. It just doesn't work that way.
Well, it's already hitting the boundaries of reality. I don't know if you saw, I think there was like a school that embraced that one kid who think he's a dog or something like that, or I don't remember the specific examples. But what I saw the YouTube video was a father spoofing a school board meeting and basically says, my son feels like a lizard. So I mean, he's not for real. He's creating a mock. He's pushing
the logical extreme.
And he was talking about how he wants the classroom become like an aquarium or a terrarium or whatever it is, and increase the humidity level and blah 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 to accommodate his son who feels like he's a lizard or and it was comedic to a certain degree, but it's pushing exactly what you're saying. It's that boundary of like, at what point do we keep entertaining people's feeling in terms of their deep identity? And at what point do we say, no, we can't accommodate that? So we accommodate if it's a mammal? I'll be an ape, you can be a dog, you can be a cat, you're good. But if you're a reptile, then no, that's too much. I mean, where's the line that you draw to say, hey, you know what? That doesn't no longer conform to reality. Now you and I have a line. It's like you're conformed to your biology. Do you have a human DNA or do you have a reptile DNA? You have human DNA. I'm sorry, buddy. You're not a reptile.
Sorry.
I mean, our line's
no terrarium for you.
Our line's pretty clear, right? And we're making light of it, but this is a serious question about the limits of expressive individual. And we can talk about expressive individual a little bit. There is a degree of expressive individualism that's healthy.
Yeah.
And we're not talking about authoritarianism, which everything's dictated.
Yeah.
But where is that line that you want to draw? And that's have an honest conversation about how expressive should you be.
Well, what you just did is you brought up another legitimate example that, when pushed to its logical extreme, shows how ridiculous this position is. It's logically incoherent, and one of the fundamental tenets of a good worldview is it has to be livable. Mm-hmm. So if you got a kid in your classroom who, because he or she feels like they're a puppy, everybody needs to call him Spot and needs to pat him on the head and scratch their tummy when they come into the classroom, that's unlivable, because the next kid could be an elephant, and the next kid's a lion, and the next kid's an alien from Mars, and so anyway, this whole idea of being true to your inner feelings, we could make a strong case that your feelings are the last thing you want to follow because they're so volatile. They're so unpredictable. They're so, 1 minute they're tepid, the next minute they're out of control. So you don't want feelings that have the final authority. But that is this concept of expressive individualism. It's a part of our culture today. I think it's even finding expression in the local church, because we cannot live in the surrounding environment without having some of that spill over into how we approach sermon preparation or how we approach the worship service. I mean, so talk a little bit about what is expressive individualism. How does that follow on this new understanding of the self? I guess we talked a little bit about it. But
yeah, I mean, basically, if you follow the train of thought, it's your true self, your best self, your most authentic self, the self that needs to be, like, authenticity in general is a good thing, right?
Right.
Authenticity is saying, hey, who I am inside is who I'm expressing outside.
Right.
So you know what, if I struggle with this issue inside, but I pretend I never struggle with it, people will call it hypocrisy or two-faced, and we understand all that, right? And authenticity in general is saying, hey, you know what, I'm going to be real. I'm going to be real.
Yeah. But the old real, because we just did a series, as you know, on guilt and shame. Mm-hmm. The old understanding of authenticity was for a person to be able to share what they truly felt in an atmosphere that was safe, not for validation of how they felt necessarily, but thank you for sharing. Now let's deal with the issue. Yep. So if someone says, I hate you and I want to kill you, we would say, thank you for being honest, but let's deal with the anger.
Now, like, I got it out. Now everyone knows. Great. I'm going to keep hating you. Right.
Yeah, I'm not going, thank you.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Well, now I know why you stare at me like that. No, true authenticity comes with a purpose, with a trajectory. True authenticity is not the end. It's a means to get to healing and restoration, right?
Yeah. So we want, so in church we want an authentic culture. But if someone says, I am attracted sexually to men, I want to have sex with another man. In fact, I am living in a homosexual relationship with another man. In the church, we don't say, yay, thank you for being authentic. We celebrate who you are and what you're feeling. We call that repentance, and we call that confession of sin. We call that being honest about it. But we don't embrace what God does not embrace. We embrace you as a person. We embrace your authentic sharing of your feeling and your struggles. We do not embrace your behavior.
And we embrace the fact that when you can be authentic, then you open up the door to be healed. Confess your sin to one another and pray for each other so that you might be healed.
To be authenticity.
So you may heal. Yeah. For the heal, it's a process. It's a journey to it. But authenticity here is self-celebrated. So in other words, what's to be celebrated? What's courageous? What is seen as the enlightenment, the best of ourselves, is to simply courageously come out against culture and declare, hey, you know what? I am this. Everyone just need to look at me and just celebrate who I am, and that's our.
This is the paradox. You're looking at someone like this example that we just saw from Leah Thomas, the transgender swimmer from Penn's swim team. When people come out as gay, we have this whole coming out of the closet. We feel the need to celebrate them and put the word courageous on them. We're saying you are courageous because in the face of cultural norms or religious expectations or boundaries, you're throwing all that aside and you're coming out and you're saying, this is who I really am. And our culture today feels the need to put a badge of courage on you and then to celebrate your courageous coming out, right? So you're now the center of attention, and authenticity, inner feelings, being true to yourself. We hear all these phrases. In fact, read that. I thought that interview was a perfect example.
And I'll be real. Like, for years, I was confused about. I remember when the ESPYs celebrate Caitlyn Jenner.
Yeah.
And
ESPYs, of course, are a sporting
ESPN's award. They celebrate for like best dunk and best sportsmanship and like these physical achievements.
Right. And
I forgot what award they give Caitlyn Jenner, whatever the award was, but there was a sense of like courage and we'll celebrate Caitlyn and blah blah blah. And I was always confused. I was like, everyone was like, what's so bold and courageous about this? Because everyone's patting him in the back, her, whatever in the back. Everyone was saying, great job. Like, what's the courageous part?
Right,
now I understand. This is what Leah Thomas says. I know there will be scrutiny against me if I competed as a woman. I was prepared for that, but I also don't need anyone's permission to be myself and do the sports I love. Trans people don't transition for athletics. We transition to be happy and authentic in our true selves. Transition to get advantage is not something that ever factors into our decision.
So his point, I'm going to call him who he is.
Yes.
The right pronoun. His point was that don't accuse me that I just transitioned from being a man to a woman for an athletic competitive edge. In other words, I didn't do it for that reason. I just did it, as he said, to be happy, to be authentic to myself. And then earlier he said, I don't need anybody's permission to be myself. So it's very much, I'm my own authority. How I feel matters. How I see myself is true. And the world's job is to celebrate that. And I can't help but notice here, he says, I don't need anybody's permission to be myself or to do the sport I love. He basically says to every woman on planet Earth who's a swimmer, I'm not even thinking and don't need to think about what my personal choice, the impacts of that on anybody else's behavior, because the sense of community disappears because you're not living in a community with anybody else who might share differences of opinion. At that point, all that matters is you being true to your authentic self. Here's some more of the language. Your personal lifestyle choice. In other words, what choice you make has no moral connotation to it. It's just the fact that you're making a personal lifestyle choice that's right for you.
Well, what's moral to her is her being authentic as possible. That is the moral high ground.
Yeah.
What did you do that? Well, I was at least authentic to myself. I did it for me. I've seen people say this about like movie directors. They made a terrible movie that no one liked, and was just like, why did they do that? Well, at least I did it the way I want to do it. I was authentic with this movie. Even though objectively no one liked it, it was a terrible movie. But at least I was real to myself. I was like, I guess so. I mean.
That's great. You just spent billions of dollars and wasted everybody's time. And
that was that similar. Obviously, that's less intrusive than this case, but those type of verbiage resonates in the same language, same sphere, you know.
And again, we're going to talk about how the sexual revolution impacts the self, but as we pointed out, it's only in the realm of sexual identity. Like if I told you, hey man, I'm just being real, I love to torture puppies. It is so awesome. I love to torture puppies.
Like, well, good for you.
Thank you for being courageous. Thank you for being courageous.
One day you just embrace, you've been held back those desires for a year, but now one day you're just being your authentic self. Man, you're so bold and courageous.
And all of you puppy lovers, I don't care what you believe. You just need to celebrate the fact that this makes me feel good when I torture small.
Well, there are laws against it. Well, there used to be laws against this stuff, so we need to go to the Supreme Court and change the law because we need authentic people who torturing puppies.
You don't agree with torturing puppies? You bigot! What's the matter with you? You're just bigoted.
I mean, we're making a crazy example, but we're just pushing it to the logical end of this embracing your authentic self.
But there's 1,000, right? There's 1,000 of those examples. There's 1,000,000 of those examples. Yeah. But all that it matters for this to me is really the essence of narcissism. I'm looking in the mirror. It's all about me. It's all about my choice. It's all about me feeling good. It's all about me being authentic. Blah, 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 blah. Basically, to hell with everybody else around you who might disagree or who's impacted by your choices. In other words, nobody else gives a rip about you. It's all about me and me being authentic. So this is the whole idea of expressive individualism. And I don't know, maybe we need to pause here because we could ask the question, well, is expressive individualism all bad? Is there any redeeming quality? Most error is truth that's mixed with a little poison. So what do you think? Where does this fit into the church? How is expressive individualism maybe an improvement from where we were 100 years ago?
Well, I think the issue is culturally we swing these without the mediation of the Holy Spirit and Scriptures. We just swing back. Human nature. We're so unstable as a culture. We swing back and forth to the pendulum. This is to me, very reactive to authoritarianism, which is like, you need to conform to the state. It's all about the community. Because the dictator says so, because the king is good for the nation. I don't care that you have to be a brick builder, even though you have an awesome musical ability. Nope, forget your inner ability, your inner passions, who God made you to be. You got to be a brick builder for the good of the world and village. You're responding to this kind of very top-down, domineering community culture, which is all about what your culture says, all about what your parents says, all about what your society dictates, and you can't express yourself. You got to marry who I tell you to marry. You got to do what I tell you to do, and there's no expression at all.
So there is a swinging of the pendulum to authoritarianism, rigid conformity, and all those kinds of things, which we could argue aren't really biblical in essence. Like the whole idea of when we're raising children. Yes, there are biblical norms and biblical parameters, but every child is unique. It doesn't mean that one child gets to sin and another child doesn't. It just means that I need to understand how God's wired this child. And if I take an authoritarian cookie cutter approach to all my kids, it's not going to turn out well for some of them because they're different than their brother or sister. So,
absolutely.
So we recognize, I guess I'm trying to say, we recognize the uniqueness of the individual. There is no other Andrew Ming on planet Earth. There will never be. You are absolutely unique. So am I. So is everybody who's listening.
Yeah, we are not advocating for rampant collectivism, communism, which is all about the community and not about. But there is a place where there's both. I believe in the kingdom of God. There is a degree of individualism, expressing the gift and talent God's given you. But God talks about the Holy Spirit give gifts according to how He desires. We're all parts. I think the body is a great analogy.
Yeah.
Right? There's a common head. There's a common authority overall, right? Well, Christ is the head. Yeah. But there's individual parts with individual expression. But what is the expression for our gifts, right? You being given a great artistic gift, musical gift. You use it to celebrate yourself, elevate yourself. Yeah. No, it's for the body. It's for the head. It's for Christ.
That's such a good point and a great distinction. So the gifts that we have came from somewhere. The Bible says don't boast because you have what you have because God is the one that blessed you with that. Yeah. So the focus even on my gifts or on how I've been created is on the God who created me, and that there's, as you said, a larger purpose. The purpose isn't narcissism. The purpose isn't just accept me for who I am because this is how I think I am. This is how I think I'm supposed to be. The point is, I've been created with gifts for a purpose to bless, to serve, to love, to contribute to the common good. I'm not expecting everybody else to conform to my world and to serve me. I'm saying, no, I exist to serve others, to bless others, to love others, and ultimately to serve the Lord. And that's that beautiful balance that the Christian worldview provides between authoritarianism, like communism, and radical, insane, narcissistic individualism, which is what America is producing right now.
No healthy organization cannot have both unity and diversity at the same time. You unify across general, larger values and purpose and mission, but underneath these large banners of unity, you have diversity, like the United States used to be. Yep. We have diversity in the states, different state laws, but unify under the Constitution. But when you start taking apart the Constitution, when you start saying everyone's going to be whatever they want, we're going to embrace whatever has the largest microphone or largest pocketbook, then the nation becomes fractured and becomes weak, which is what we see today, because there's no unifying factor.
So, how are we doing here time-wise?
Yeah, we should probably wrap this one up.
Yeah, so we tried to establish today that unless you understand the shift that is happen in understanding who you are as a self, as an individual, you'll never begin to understand how everything has gotten so crazy in the world and so strange around us. To summarize, it has been a radical shift in how we view ourselves from simply two different distinct individuals to where now the locus of authority in America is not anything collective or anything outside of me, but it's me. It is how I feel. Authenticity is celebrated. Personal lifestyle choices, no matter what those choices are. In other words, there's no moral boundaries around personal lifestyle choices. It's just however I want to express myself. That's the new set of rules. And what we will kick off with in our next episode is how this expressive individualism has morphed into sexual identity, and Pastor Andrew highlighted this today. That is the one area where there are no rules anymore, very few rules, but certainly no moral framework. We're going to get into that in our next episode. We'll talk about the sexual revolution. We're also going to talk about this interesting concept called the social imaginary, and how it has shaped the atmosphere, the oxygen in which we breathe on a daily basis. I think you're going to find it very, very helpful, as our goal, again, is to understand the culture so that we can properly navigate through the culture. So thanks for being with us. We look forward to being together with you next week. Until then, have an amazing, amazing week. Love you guys.